Hello, this is Katie with Happy Hearted Watercolors, and I'm here to show you the steps to create birds on a line. We're going to start out with our tracing on stretched paper. You will need to work wet on dry for this stage. I'm starting out with my birds wet on dry in this part, and I'm going to do some variegation of the color, starting here at the top with black and then moving on down to brown just to make some interest. There may not be a bird that looks like this, but we're pretending like this is a fanciful creation. One of my favorite sayings is don't let reality get in the way of a good painting. You'll notice that I'm not placing the feet in the picture or the telephone line that they're sitting on. We'll do that later because the next step that we're going to attempt after we're finished painting our sweet little birds visiting on the line is we're going to put a background with plastic wrap. So there's one bird. Starting with another, let's make this one stay, and hopefully it will dry very quickly. If it does not, some of our bird colors are going to smooth and smooch together, but you will be able to not let that paint bleed into one another if you let the birds dry in between the first 1, 3, 5, section 1, 3, 5, and then we'll go through and do 2, 4, and 6. Now I'm going to start partway into the next color in order to bring down some of the brown and create a smooth transition between the brown and the yellow. Excuse the phone. We're going to be going all the way down, carefully sliding. You'll notice on the reference photo that it looks like the birds have some salt on them. You can probably notice that after our last week's lesson. You can do that, and that's great, but since we're doing a variegated, or doing some pattern on our background, I thought I'd keep the birds a simple color, but try it. It might look great. Okay, I'm just smoothing these colors down. Now I'm going to go on to the third bird, which is going to be kind of a red color. I'm going to choose a cool red, and because I don't have all my materials here with me today, I'm going to use the side as my try paper, or the paper that I use to kind of try out my colors. You should never put your brush onto your paper without trying it out first, because as I've found quite often, I end up with plopping either the wrong color or too bright a color onto my paper. Double check. There we go, because I'm moving directly out of my paint pan right now because I'm limited with the number of little paint pans that I brought in with me to the gallery to do this video. Okay, so we're smoothing this guy's feathers down. And if you tip your board, I'm holding it up with one hand and painting with the other. The other thing you could do is put something underneath the top of the board, and that would make your water flow down better. I know some people who only paint on an incline, and it just depends on what you get used to. My space happens to deal with flat out painting best. Now you probably noticed that I have a double line right here from my tracing. So what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to make this bird's feathers dark on the edge. Again, I'm trying out my color. I don't want to be too dark, but I want it to be dark enough to cover up this. It'll just add a little bit of interest and it'll cover up that black that from the tracing. And then I'll go over here too. That kind of makes a little bit of an interest for his tail. Okay, now we're going to start over here with number 2 bird. And number 2 bird I decided was going to be all brown. So we'll see what happens, see if they're dry enough. You can tell they're totally dry if the paper is warm to the touch. My paper is cool to the touch. So we will see what happens. If I work pretty dry here, I should be okay. So that means I'm going to put a lot of pigment and not as much water on the next birds. Turning the board around so that you can use your hand to the best angle is always a good idea. You'll notice that the paint is being trapped by gravity and moving to the lowest point of the tipping that I've got going with my paint. I'm working quickly here. You can go much slower. You're going to have much better strokes. Your lines are going to be much cleaner and smoother. But I'm doing this quickly so you don't have to watch through a whole lot of stuff. You can also, I think, speed it up. I'm not sure. Okay, there's 1, 2, 3 finished. Now the next one, and because I worked kind of dry, I didn't have too much bleeding over into, or any, doesn't look like any. Now I'm going back through and just working on those brush strokes that got a bit liney there. Okay, my next bird is black again. This one's going to be all black. Again, this is not letting reality get in the way of an interesting painting. And I'm going to need to work with more pigment and less water, which will also change the look of the paint. I'm going to have less paper showing through the paint because it's thicker. The paint is thicker. Now, depending on the paint that you have, there are 3 kinds of paints, or 3 different kinds of transparency markers for the paints. There's transparent paint, which does a really good job of letting the paper show through. And that's one of the things that many watercolor artists, because I wasn't working with the best angle of my hand, I made a very bad line, but you know what? This is not reality, so I can change the curl of that feather, tail feather. If you want a sharp line, start from the sharpest line and go up, and that will, the point of your brush will work much better that way. Okay, another success. I still am not going to put the line that they're sitting on or their legs, because when I go to the next step, you will notice that the line will get smeary if you don't do that. Try it if you want. It's always okay to make an experiment. Remember, art is an experiment. And I'm going to go to a different color than I did on the next piece that you'll see, because what I had to do this painting in is in 2 steps. I'm going to use purple, because I think there's purple-headed martins out there somewhere. possibly. Isn't there a hymn with purple-headed martins? I notice that when I work with less water and more pigment, I get more lines with my brush strokes, and I really love the beautiful smoothness of watercolor. So I'm going to add in a little more water and see if we can keep it from bleeding over into the red bird. Bleeding or blooming is another word that you might have heard. You don't want to create blooms, but sometimes blooms are really cool and you might do it on purpose, or sometimes it happens by accident and you think, oh, I kind of like that after you look at it later. Notice I'm adding another color in, and the way to do that is to start above or into the previous paint that you're using. So in the purple, I started using the black into the black when I was still, I started putting the black into the purple so that the colors will mix and play together. I like to think of the colors playing together. And so here we go. I kind of like that purple-headed whatever it is. Again, if you want a sharp point on the tail, start at the bottom so that the brush will work to your advantage. Okay, now we're going to rock and roll this baby until it stops moving. And now I'm going to take and move over to the next painting, which I already had completed. And we're going to use the plastic wrap and create a texture on the background. Now, because these are birds and there's a sky, I decided that it would be fun to have blue. So I've made up my blue. And I've got some green there, and I might have to dip into my palette to add more color and water in as we go. But this next step is done wet in wet. So I'm going to wet this down, wet the whole painting down, but I'm going to put the water just about 1/4 of an inch from the edge of the bird, and I want the paint so that it's not going to slide off the paper, but I don't want it to be dry either by the time I'm getting everything wet. So I'm going to get this all wet, and you'll notice that I've tinted the water a little bit so that you can see where I'm working. So I've tinted this blue, which will be perfect because I'm going to drop in color, and dropping in color is using the technique of wet and wet and dropping in color in different places. And then we're going to do another thing on that. We're just layering all sorts of different techniques together today by while this paint is still very wet, we're going to put plastic wrap, or in my case, since I'm here at the office, I couldn't find plastic wrap, but I did find a plastic bag. So we will experiment with how a plastic bag works. And you won't get to see what it looks like until I send this to you after it's dry, because you do not want to take your plastic bag or your plastic wrap off of the painting until it's totally dry. It leaves kind of almost a texture of it leaves a texture that might look like leaves, and you could enhance that or you could not. You also may find that the plastic wrap moves some of the paint into the onto the top of the bird, and we're going to talk about a way that we can kind of, after it's dry, we might either add a leaf over that, or notice that my red line that I was saying that I put there. Okay, so this is pretty wet. It's still either a shiny or satin, So now I'm going to start dropping in color, and because this is like a sky, I'm going to drop, and with trees maybe in the background, I'm going to kind of just make some tree shapes or branch shapes into the birds, and then take that brush and carefully connect I'm using two brushes here. I'm using a large brush and a small brush because working with a small brush is much easier. I'm going to clean that brush off because I tried it and it was had some paint on it. So I'm just going to go right up to it, and I'm noticing that I want to get some of this blue in there. So I'm just going to drop in blue, noticing it's a little puddly and I don't want this to be too puddly. But I'm just dropping in the color. Actually, maybe the word is dabbing the color in. Maybe I'll dab blue around here. And when I'm going around the bird, I need to be aware that I need to change colors every once in a while. So I might need to put green in. And I'm just going directly from the green paint to the blue paint with this because it's all mixing together. And I've got a puddle forming over here at the bottom, so I'm going to use just a tissue to siphon off some of that extra puddle so I don't end up with the paint in my lap. So tip, just a little siphon. Don't touch the tissue to the water because you don't want to wipe it off. Okay, so you can kind of see where this is going with this here. Gotta work quickly because I don't want my video to go over 25 minutes. So I need to quickly go around. So you're gonna work slowly and patiently. And if you notice things start to dry, then you're gonna just go back to your clear water and add more clear water. And you can tell if it's getting dry by putting your eye down at about paper level and looking to see. So you can just kind of see the colors. Cleaned my brush off to go back in here for more green. To go around his little head. And you do want to work quickly enough so that it's still wet where you started to put the plastic wrap. So you can't really go too slow. You can't go too slow because you don't want the paint that you started with to be dry. You still need to have some water in there, but you know what? I'm going to solve that problem right now. Here's how you do it if you like to work slowly. This is still wet, and so I'm going to take my piece of tissue, or not tissue, but my piece of plastic wrap, and set it on and just kind of crumple it up. Now hopefully this will stay. I don't know if it will, but if you can kind of see how what I can do is put something on there to keep it down. So I'll have to keep this still the whole time I'm working. So I'm setting some pencils on there so that the plastic wrap will keep touching the paint and create, you can kind of see what's happening here where it's darker there, it pulls the paint in. So that's what we're gonna do. We're just gonna put some objects that will hold the plastic wrap down. Your plastic wrap will hold down better, I think, than a plastic bag, which is what I'm using. And moving around. Now here, I'm noticing that I've got to get some more blue. Let's get blue down here. I'm not going to put too much blue down there because down near the bottom, because that's There's not going to be sky down there, but we can pretend like there is a little bit. And let's add in some green. This green looks a little brighter, so I'm going to need to go back in and add more green in these other places so that there's unity of color. What happened was I put a little paint in from my palette without mixing very well and making sure the colors matched. Another lesson, gotta make sure you test your paint before you go on. Test your brush load of paint onto your paper. So let's put some green right here. And I'm gonna make this, because branches don't appear out of nowhere, so I wanted that to go to attached to another tree. Alrighty, here we go, more. And again, I'm watching to make sure that this is still very damp. It's not shiny right now, but it's still so damp. I think I'm gonna be okay, but I'm gonna have to work quickly from here on out. Or I need to, let's just do it. Let's just add more water. I'm just kind of